In a quiet Pennsylvania town where life is uneventful, two teenagers wandered along the rusty train tracks. On one side stood rows of townhouses, their lights faintly flickering in the distance, and on the other loomed dense, shadowy woods. As they walked, laughter and conversation filled the air until one of them blurted out a loud remark. Then, from deep within the woods, came an echo. The same words, but not quite right. The tone, off, distorted, a twisted mimicry of her voice. Their smiles vanished, replaced by wide eyes of fear. Without speaking, they turned and left, the tension of the moment trailing behind them like an unwelcome shadow. Time passed, and the eerie event faded into memory. But grief has a way of pulling us into solitude. After losing a friend in a car crash, the protagonist found themselves drawn to the same train tracks, seeking solace in the familiar. The evening sky bled into dusk, painting the world in shades of purple and orange. As the darkness crept in, a voice shattered the silence, a voice they knew all too well. It was their father's, calling their name, but their father had been dead for 3 years. The woods on the far side of the tracks seemed alive, beckoning. The voice called again, more insistent, repeating their name. Against better judgment, they stepped into the darkness, the forest swallowing them whole. The further they went, the quieter the world became. The train tracks were no longer in sight, and the daylight had all but disappeared. A chill crept up their spine as the voice returned, now, emotionless and cold. "Come over here. I want to show you something." The forest seemed to close in. The oppressive silence, broken only by their shaky breath. Realization struck like lightning. This wasn't right. It couldn't be their father. The voice shifted, growing harsh and commanding. "Come over here." Panic set in. The air turned foul, a putrid stench of decay and rot filling their lungs. They turned and ran, branches clawing at their clothes as the sound of heavy footsteps closed in behind them. It moved with terrifying speed, its steps uneven yet unnervingly deliberate. The train tracks came into view, a lifeline in the growing darkness. A train thundered past, its blaring horn and rumbling wheels drowning out everything else. They sprinted toward it, hoping the noise would mask their escape. Behind them, a tall, shadowy figure loomed at the tree line, its grotesque silhouette barely illuminated by the train's headlights. It stopped short of the tracks, retreating into the blackness as the train roared by. The air reeked of its presence, but the danger seemed momentarily held at bay. The figure was gone, but the memory of its foul stench and inhuman form lingered. Back home, the world felt different, as though some part of the forest had followed them. They lay in bed, their dog at their side, a silent sentinel against the dark. Sleep refused to come. Outside, the wind carried faint whispers, and shadows seemed to gather unnaturally at the edges of the room. They stared at the ceiling, haunted not just by what they had seen, but by what could have happened. They knew one thing for certain: they would never cross those tracks again. Some things in the dark are best left alone. They call to us, wearing familiar faces and voices, but their intentions are anything but human. And sometimes, the wisest choice is to walk away before it's too late.